Theme song for the Gear Podcast. Welcome to the Gear Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Troy Naberman.
I'm Leon Todd, and today we have the one, the only, the myth, the man, the legend, Mr. Jason Tong. How are you, Jason?
I'm good, guys. Thanks for having me on. Well, it's an honor and a privilege.
Oh, well, we very much appreciate it. You got to see the theme song live. You can confirm Amazing. It's not pre-recorded. I don't tune that.
No.
Just as is.
I wondered whether that was a pre-recorded video, but now I know it's real.
I thought about it the first time, actually, just to put the same one in twice. I think we chopped an episode down into two because it got so long. But anyway, yeah. Well, said welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here. The first thing that I think is really important that we ask you before any other topic is because you're over in Melbourne, correct?
Yeah.
So,
yep.
Mate. What's your?
I know what this question is going to be.
What's your team? What's your team?
I knew it. Yeah. I knew it. So I'll give you a clue. See if you can pick it. Right. So I obviously didn't grow up here.
Yep.
Most people know I grew up in New Zealand, right? So we didn't have like a team that I grew up with. So you have to adopt one.
Mm-hmm. And
we live in a suburb called Ormond, which is very close to Moorabbin.
Okay. So
does that give you a clue as to what team we adopted? Yeah.
Okay.
St Kilda. Which
Ross the boss.
So you can imagine the glory and the disappointment of moving here, and we actually lived here for 3 years in the late 90s, and this is before kids,
mm-hmm.
and didn't like we were just living in the city and kind of never. I was aware of AFL, went to a few matches and so on, but I didn't kind of get into it. But when we came back to live with a couple of youngsters in tow and kind of moved into the suburbs, you just gotta commit and go.
Mm-hmm.
So that was 2006, right, when we came.
Yeah, right, okay.
So we had this amazing run of, as I said, glory and disappointment.
Yep.
2009, 2010, around that time, you guys will probably remember, yeah?
Yep, absolutely.
Oh, man, I still remember that 2010 grand final, the tie, which for any of our American or European audience, the absolute mania and rarity that a drawn AFL grand final is. It's not a case. Have they changed the rules now where it's like
I think they have, yeah.
Yeah.
So they play extra time now or something, do they?
Yeah. So at the time, the rule was if the scores were level at the end of the game, everyone shakes hands and they show up the next week and they play the entire game again.
Yep.
And that's such a rare thing. And I'm pretty sure it's because of that they changed the rule, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's too difficult to get the MCG two weeks in a row like that on such short notice. So there was a lot of confusion from players too at the end of that game. Like I've listened to podcasts with guys that were there and they were just like, "Man, I'm on top of this guy. What am I? Like, what's happening? The siren's gone." So yeah, and then you get beautiful moments like 2017. Luke Shuey kicks a goal after the siren to beat Port Adelaide in the prelim finals. So it's just magic,
and that's really what it's all about. But Jace, for anyone who's unfamiliar, we have spoken, feel like we mention you at least once per podcast because
yeah, I noticed that.
For someone who's in Australia doing what you do it's something I find incredibly cool and I have a lot of respect for. But can you give us the 5 to 10 minute Jason Tong story? How did you end up what you're doing? How did you end up doing what you're doing? And what are you doing now? Like, what are you working on, and what's keeping you busy?
Cool. All right. I'm happy to tell the story, and I'll try and keep it inside 10 minutes, right?
Go as long as you like, mate. It's all good.
Yeah, I know we go anywhere with this, right? So I had studied electronics after I finished school. I did a science degree. And I majored in applied physics, which was basically software engineering, digital technology, and analog electronics kind of combined together. And I didn't do anything with it other than I ended up in my kind of taking up a day job as a software programmer, and then kind of that's kind of been my career, I guess, involved in software. But the electronic stuff and all that was always there. And I was always interested in it. So I started playing guitar when I was like, I don't know, 12, 13 years old, whatever, right? So it's always been that's been the big passion. Yeah. So I always tinkered with stuff because I kind of had an understanding of how things worked, but also realized that, with that understanding, I could kind of do little things, So you'd mod your guitar, or, you'd wire your own speaker cab or stuff like that. Just basic stuff, really. I never got into like ripping apart tube amps or anything like that.
No, it's the stuff that, like, why would you pay someone like a couple $100 to do when you can just do it yourself? It's
totally.
Yeah. And it's one thing I say to my students as well, like, just buy a soldering iron and make your own cables. It's so easy. And you save hundreds, if not thousands of dollars over your lifetime. Just do it. And you can fix stuff when you need to. So anyway.
And there's nothing better than like mid-gig having to kick your pedal board around the stage to get your handmade cables working again.
Oh, yeah. Trial by fire.
You're laughing because it's happened to everybody. Right?
It's happened so much. Hums and buzzes, like just dealing with that stuff too.
It's like, oh, yeah. I know exactly where that is. I know the corner that I cut there, and now it's rearing its ugly head.
Well, that's actually a reason I don't really change pickups in guitars anymore, because I've had a few experiences like that where the general cables are okay, but for some reason I never feel safe with a guitar that I've wired. So anyway,
yeah, right.
But go on.
Cool. Yeah, so it was probably about 10 years ago that I don't know what inspired the first thing, but I had in the little collection, I had a PV Classic 30. You remember those amps?
Yep.
They sound kind of okay, Clean channel on there is pretty reasonable.
They were a bit of a thing before, like, more affordable tube amps sort of happened.
Yeah.
So, like late 2000s-ish, I think.
The pre-Hot Rod Deluxe.
Yeah. And the construction method in those things, as I found out, was awful. They were the worst amps to kind of work on. But there was this old website, I don't know if it's still around, but it was called The Blue Guitar. Steve Aloha was the guy, and he'd put together this library of mods, mostly for Fender amps and stuff like that. But he had all these mods for a PV Classic 30. And I tried a few of them, and it was to kind of make the gain channel a bit more kind of Marshall-ish kind of thing. And I implemented these mods, and I was like, oh my God, this thing sounds unreal. Like the difference it made just with like literally a handful of parts, and then I just had the bug. I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. So then I got a few kit amps and built them from Nick at Stereotone.
Yep.
You start with a kit, right? Get everything you need in one box and then build from that.
I was this close to getting one of those in about 2011, but I'm too scared of messing with tube amps and like literally blowing myself up. So
it's there are things to look out for sure, but if you're methodical and not reckless, it's fine.
That's no good for me.
Yeah. If you're none of those things, then I wouldn't recommend it. And some people say, build a pedal first or whatever, right? I never did that. I just
went straight in
because it was like pedals of.
You went in straight in head first.
Totally. Yep.
Thank you very much. That's the end of the podcast.
Wow. Go out on a winner.
Okay, so you were kind of like the guy who's never been to a gym before, and you watch some videos and you're like, you know what, I'm just going to go do this, and you just walk straight up to the squat rack and just load it up and you just go.
Yep. Like 80 kilos on each side.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like, what's the worst thing that can happen?
A bit like that. And so the kits were cool. Like I did a simple 18-watt, so like a 1974 model Marshall, the 1974X.
I've heard that's the one to start with.
That's what I did first. Yeah.
The little 18-watt Marshall, and I've seen those. I've come close to buying not the kit because I'm super lazy, just the amp. It's like a cool, it's a cool little forgotten little thing that I guess Marshall did.
It is a cool amp and it has a really cool. It's an EL84 power amp in it, but it's a cracking sounding power amp actually. It's the same. It's what and Dave Friedman's mentioned this many times, right? So I'm not giving away any secrets here. That's his the 20-watt range he has.
Yeah, the Pink Tacos and stuff.
The Little Sister and the Pink Taco. All that stuff is kind of inspired by that power amp.
Right. Okay.
That little 1974 style kind of 20-watt Marshall. It's a cracker, right? And then Nick has a version of that actually has, he calls it the TMB 18 watt. So it has a tone stack because those original 1974s just have like a volume and a tone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
right.
Which is just a kind of a low pass filter, basically. Just cuts top end.
Yep.
Whereas he's got a version of it that actually has treble, middle, bass, like a proper tone stack.
Yep.
In one of the channels. So yeah, that was a really good kind of first kit because it was pretty simple. And then I did his Yeti, which is a pre-tone stack diode clipping Jose amp.
Yep.
Kind of based around if you know this, the Steve Vai Jose that Pete Thorne
watch the video
on his channel. And he's got the push-pull master, and the push-pull master changes the position of where the tone stack is in relation to the master volume.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's that with it. I can't remember whether pushed on or pulled out. I can't remember. But pre-tone stackers, they talk about in that video, they say, hey, it kind of sounds like a loudness button on your old stereo. Yeah, it's that.
Right. It's so
and
interesting.
That's the design.
Yeti, and that thing blew my face off. That's like one of the best sounding. Yeah, there's two small heads that I've heard that I was like, that's awesome. And you built one of the other ones. So we'll get to that story later.
Right. Yeah, the Cali, yeah.
So
that's the same, that kind of, let's call it architecture, amp architecture was made really popular by Mark Cameron.
Oh, okay.
As well, remember Cameron amps? The CCV and all that kind of stuff. All heavily inspired by the work that Jose Arredondo did. And I mean, the guy wasn't even a guitar player, as my understanding, just a kind of very clever engineer.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And started modding those Marshalls and kind of came up with that. Really, the first, maybe not the first, but certainly made the use of Zener diodes or diodes for diode clipping inside amps really, really popular.
Yep.
And probably an idea that was generated from what was already happening inside pedals at that time, using diodes to clip waveforms to generate distortion.
Right.
And he kind of took that concept and put it inside a Marshall, and then they went from there. So like I did those kits and so on, and that was cool. And then I got more ambitious because I was like, I want to actually start building something. And again, this was all just for me. It was just like a hobby, you build for yourself and see how far you can go. I wanted to put something together that didn't come in a box. I would assemble the parts and do the whole thing. And I wanted to, at that point, and I told a little bit of the story on the Tone Talk episode that I was on, that I saw this video of Phil X in Dave Friedman's shop.
Yep, I remember that video.
With the red wallpaper and all that, and he's ripping all these licks on this brown eye. I was like, my God, that thing sounds amazing. So I doing a BE100 as the next step was a bit ambitious. So I did a Dirty Shirley.
Okay.
And I reverse engineered it from pictures.
All right.
I found on the internet. Yeah. I found as many pictures as I could, and there's enough on there, you know. And I just drew the whole schematic out just from all these different angles and kind of filled in the blanks of anything that I couldn't figure out.
That's awesome.
And built that. Yeah, and that was a huge, like doing it that way was awesome because it was like, that's how you learn, like it's like anything in life, right? If people just tell you the answer to a question,
you don't,
and you don't have to investigate it yourself, you probably won't remember it.
Yeah.
It's like you want to understand the argument, not necessarily the end result. And if you understand the argument, you can always get to the end result.
Yeah. So the amount of research and pissing around and troubleshooting once the amp was actually built as well was like, I learned a lot from that. And so from there, I wanted to progress into channel switching amps because then that's the next step, right? Well, the Dirty Shirley is a fantastic sounding amp. I think one of Dave's best circuits actually. But it's a single channel, and it's like, okay, what next? 2-channel amp with switching and stuff like that. Relays. Get into having to deal with relays and channel switching, all this kind of stuff, and that's the next step. And it wasn't long before I realized that to do that properly, you needed to get into printed circuit board design.
Right. Okay. Because that's a whole art form, isn't it?
That's a whole thing, right? Yeah. And that's where I realized that after some, I had very lucky to have a local mentor, a guy called Don Kohinger, and Don's based in Melbourne, right? And he's just genius, amazing, and just knowledge of pretty much everything to do with tube amps and tubes. He had actually progressed with his own journey to the point where he was doing his own circuit boards. Now, Don is the guy behind his original company was Southern Cross Audio, but then it became the Melbourne Amp Company.
Okay,
and
I've actually heard of Melbourne Amp before.
Dave Leslie is his.
Oh, right.
Dave Leslie from Baby Animals was just kind of his main guy, right? So Dave, he built a custom head for Dave that Dave still uses.
Okay.
Like he's carting that around and with all the gigs at the moment. And I was actually speaking to Scott Kingman just the other day from Screaming Jets, who because Scott has just finished his 5th amp that he's built.
Oh, right. Awesome.
Yeah, he got the bug big time.
Yeah.
For anyone listening who's wondering, yes, Scott is related to Brett.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I didn't know that, but I thought, right.
Yeah.
The world's slowly shrinking in here. So it's like the characters.
They call him Pizza Dude.
Yeah.
It is. So Scott, and this is the thing that I found, and we'll talk about the kind of the DIY thing that happened. So once I got into printed circuit board design, which was a kind of necessity to move to that next level, I found that the skills that I developed in my kind of working life had set me up for doing this, because it's kind of engineering, it's CAD based stuff. It's not programming, but it's got similar.
It's adjacent to it. It's like, in the Troy Nababan origin story, you can play a bit of guitar, you can sing kind of nice. Can you do a gig where you play bass and sing?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe.
And the answer was sort of.
Yeah.
And then 10 years later, But
totally.
Then you have to go on that journey of just practice and making lots and lots of mistakes. So,
So my next goal was to build. Again, this was all just for me, right? I wanted to build a wizard.
Oh yeah, awesome.
Right, I'd never heard one in the flesh.
Yep.
But I'd heard them on YouTube, and I was just like, man, those things sound amazing.
And also, when you look at the wizard client list, it looks like Wizard just made it up, because it just looks like this guy's obviously not for real. This guy doesn't know anything about music, because of course, or their mum wrote it for them. Like, who are your clients?
You should come up with a much more believable client list.
Yeah. It's like Foo Fight, like literally everyone on. And you look at it, you go, huh?
Yeah.
Who is this? And then you go down that rabbit hole, and
but you're right,
this is where you get to make one, right?
But nobody has those in Australia, really.
No,
because I know there was a local band that went over to work with, which is the Kulik, that's the engineer and not the guitar player. Is that Bob or Bruce? Yeah, Bob. So they worked with him about maybe 10 years ago, and he just had a bunch of wizards and stuff. And they came back, it's like, oh man, it's the greatest guitar I've ever heard. But you got to go there to hear it. You just can't find one coming up secondhand. Yeah. Although one has recently in the last 6 months on Facebook, so it's quite funny.
There's a handful of them around, but they seem to be more recent acquisitions. I'm not sure. Right. I mean, there's been a few that have been here for a little while. I know I can name 3 or 4 people I know in Melbourne that have got them.
Certainly over here is not the case. But that's so funny, because it's like you guys probably have, I don't know what percentage, but a lot more cool stuff over there, because population's bigger, you're adjacent to Sydney and whatnot. So just generally you can get stuff a bit easier. Over here it's like there are 2 Bogner Ecstasies that are in WA. And it's like, I think this guy's got it now. But that used to belong to him. But you trace the lineage back, and it's just like, they're not that uncommon. It's so strange.
No, they're not. Not. I've had heaps in here actually. Well, not heaps, but maybe 4 or 5 that I've worked on.
Well, I reckon if I wanted to hear an actual one, like aside from the Synergy module, like I could make a couple of calls, but I'd have to find that person, and it would be a pain in the ass. And like, what's the point? It's kind of
exactly.
But anyway, sorry.
So I did this. So I got the. So I was actually a pretty active member. There's a kind of a bit of an underground forum, slow clone or SLO clone forum.
Yes.
And it's still up and running. And I've actually got to know the guy that runs it. So Jed, who's based in California, is like he pays the hosting fees himself every month to keep that forum going. And he's never put any ads on it or anything like that.
Wow.
It's not that active anymore. There's not a lot of activity on it. But back then, kind of 5 years ago or something, 5 or 6 years ago, it was pretty active, and there was a lot of stuff in there. Being a lot of Q&A, a lot of things. It's an amp builders forum.
Yep.
Yeah. Right.
And you could find information about production amps on there because there was definitely a cohort of people on that forum that would reverse engineer stuff and post it there.
Yep.
So if you went searching on the internet, you wouldn't find this stuff because this is it's behind a secure site.
And it's private, right?
Yeah. I remember at one point one of the admins is a guy named Joey, who is again just probably the most knowledgeable amp guy on the planet. But no one kind of knows who he is, and you can just tell. You read the answers that he writes to questions that are posted on that forum, and it's like, oh man, that dude knows stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the questions at one point to join the forum, you could register and all that, and you had one question to answer, and it was the name of Joey's cat. And if you didn't know the name of Joey's cat, you weren't getting in. So it was stuff like that. I think the questions probably a little bit easier now, but I can't remember how I got in. I just managed to fluke something because the question was something random. But
I'm trying to think how you'd find that, like going by like Facebook groups and like Rig Talk, and it's like, oh, maybe it's going to come up somewhere, and
you kind of got to know at that point. You had to know someone who was already in,
okay,
and then they could message Joey, and then Joey would tell you the name of his cat, and then you could,
That's really funny.
And so, but there was stuff if you could get into that forum, then information was there. So this wizard thing, there was information on there that I could use to go, okay, I can build myself this thing. And I did a circuit board for it, and it was the first kind of complex one that I did. And those kind of circuit boards, it's about kind of yay big. It's by this.
Yep.
And then by posting some kind of questions on the forum and so on, people were going, well, how many of these are you doing? Because I want one.
All right. And
then I did an initial run of like 30 boards as a kind of minimum order, and I only wanted one.
Yeah.
And I just put a post up and said, well, I've got these things here. Who wants one? And in 24 hours, they all sold.
Wow.
And I was like $20, $30 a piece, whatever, right?
Yep.
And I was like, there's a market for these things. So I set about kind of setting up the whole DIY supply thing, and we're still doing that. So that's pretty active. Mostly US customers.
Okay.
So we do. We've got circuit boards that people can use as kind of the backbone of a build that they want to do, and I use Nick to supply chassis that I've designed.
Oh, yep.
Because it's actually cheaper to get. I can get him to use his metal fabricator and ship them into a US customer. It's cheaper than getting it done here and shipping from Australia. He can supply transformers as well. He's got his own transformer winder that he uses for his amps. So people can kind of get almost a kit, but I'm only supplying a couple of bits, and the rest of it they just assemble themselves.
Yep.
So that's kind of going really, really nicely. And then the hobby kind of grew into starting to build amps to order. So people were starting to reach out to me and say, can you build me this? Can you build me that? And of course, you kind of start doing that stuff by building some kind of more clone-oriented things. It's kind of how you get your bearings right and get some kind of runs on the board and also learn. Because as soon as you start having to doing the stuff yourself, you have to solve all the problems yourself as well.
Yeah.
And also you've now got clients as well. That's a different.
Yeah. And it starts to kind of build a little bit, but every, building amps is, it's one thing you can get noise, getting to the point where like, oh, it's working. Here's some noise coming out of the amp.
Yeah.
That's one thing, and that's a big achievement. That's awesome. People get there, But then you realize after you spend some time with the amp, it's like, oh, it's got 100 hertz hum. Or when I do this, it goes and it breaks up and it sounds like blocking distortion, or all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And knowing how to solve that stuff and kind of getting all those kinks and so on ironed out, that took some time, and it's all the stuff you just got to figure out. So then it was like, I want to start just actually working on my own circuits, and that kind of grew to the the Alta is kind of the first really what I would say genuine. I did it from scratch myself.
Yep.
The Cali, which we still do, it's my interpretation of an existing.
Right.
That's like the Yeti or the Jose Arredondo diode clipping modded Marshall. Mm-hmm. That's what that Cali is. And it's kind of my version of it, I guess. But I've never for a second said that I invented that.
Right.
From scratch. Whereas
it's very much an amp where it's meat and potatoes isn't the right word. It's like surf and turf. Like step up from a 2203 or something like that, where it's just like you've got enough kind of stuff to change on it where you can actually make that amp sound absolutely terrible if you don't know what you're doing. Know what you're doing, then it's just an absolute machine. It's really, really great. It's obviously that's the first one of your amps that I tried, and I've looked through on my YouTube channel the first mention of you. This is where I became aware of you. A friend of mine let me borrow they had a Diesel Einstein.
Oh yeah.
And one of the comments is, have you heard of Headfirst Amplification? I know he is a member of the Cherrytone Facebook group, but he's doing some pretty cool stuff on your side of the world, which made me go, never heard of him. Like, I should see my reply to this. Here we go. Yeah. Basically never heard of him, and then checked it out, and then, here we are years later. But
Well, I can't remember how we connected. I think, did I message you? I can't remember. I probably did.
Probably one of those mutual things where it's like, I think I might have got a question on a Q&A, which was like, I'm aware of this person, but never met him. And the internet, when the internet is nice, it's really nice like that, where it's pretty easy to be like, I never in a million years would have thought that person has heard of what I've done. Cool, I'll just leave a comment, and and you sort of go from there. So that's that. It's a really interesting story of like unintended consequences. Just kind of almost like following your nose. Like, I don't mind this, and I can do a bit of this. And have you found?
Well, it was a bit like that.
Yeah, have you found that and this is maybe more of like a philosophical thing. I remember going to a Steve Vai clinic where he was like, I learned in my career to follow my strengths and focus on those rather than focus on my like perceived weaknesses. Have you found that by kind of focusing on what you do well, that you've just kind of, like with the development of the Alta, say, that's kind of where that expression of this is what I do, this is what I like about amps and amp design, that it's kind of naturally flown that way?
Yeah, look, I think so. I haven't been to a Steve Vai clinic, but I've heard him talk about that before. I've seen videos where he says, why would I focus on my weaknesses? That's crazy. Like I focused on my strengths and I went 100% on them.
That's why he doesn't sing on his albums anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, bududung.
No, it's actually not that bad. It's not that bad.
Steve's a better singer than Joe Satriani, and a much better singer than me. So
that's true. Look, Steve Vai, I just loved his early stuff, like really early stuff, Flexible.
Yep.
All that kind of just out of Frank Zappa and his, very early stuff. And I still really appreciate them, but not the same way I used to. Like,
I think you can still listen to Passion and Warfare, like even now. It's still a cool album, and there's cool ideas on there. Some of the 90s stuff, it doesn't really hit the spot like it did when I was a little bit younger. But I think everything really came together on that album that is like kind of a masterpiece of that sound. But yeah.
Can't disagree with that. Yeah. I mean, I ended up buying it's still up on my wall there. I got a Flower Pattern 7.7.
That's awesome.
Which I bought. Yeah, right. Yeah, wicked. I've had that guitar since new, basically.
Really?
We have friends, two of them who are, mutual group of friends, but they bought Floral Gems together. And they're out of all the ones that I've played, they're consistently, I've played a bunch of gems before and being like, this is cool, but they're the ones where you play it and you go, wow, this is actually a thing.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Sorry, Troy, you go.
No, you go, mate. You go.
No, I was going to ask, because you both talk about, and I think you both own RG550s.
Yep, correct.
Now, how different are they to a gem, or are they the same?
They're very similar. I'll just speak on one of these, the floral ones that I've played a little bit more, and it has been like beat to death, and like in the same way that Steve's like yeah, it's so worn, but it's like it's hard to know how much of it is the guitar or how much it's just like because it's been so played in. But it just feels really comfortable. I think it's like it requires less adjustment. Like for me, when I play a 550 or a 570, because the neck feels a certain way, it's like so thin and narrow. It takes me a little bit to get used to it. Whereas the gem to me it was like holding a Strat. So whether or not that's true of all of them, I can't say, but on that one, it definitely felt like that. And it sounds good too.
He's got very acidic sweat. And
he will rust a set of strings in one gig. I've never seen anyone else do it.
Wow.
He borrowed one of my guitars.
I know one other person with that, where it's just mental.
Yeah, it's insane. Like you have to, like I would hate to have to change my strings every gig. I go like 4 months gigging consistently on a set of like, I use NYXLs, but yeah, I just don't give a shit and I don't sweat them out. Yeah. But this guy,
you just keep going until you break one and then go, oh, okay, now it's time.
I go till I realize that the guitar starts sounding a bit dull. And then I'm like, why does the guitar sound kind of crappy? And it's like, oh, I haven't changed the strings on this in months. It was worse with my acoustic because I put elixirs on there and just keep playing. I don't ever remember when I change a set of strings. So sometimes it's like I've used them for 3 months and I'll break one and I'll just grab a string out and chuck it on there and then go another 6 months. That's happened. So yeah. And actually I remember,
I can't do the one string thing. I'm like, no, I can't deal with that.
It's just
in my mind. I've got to replace all of them.
Or it's usually a mid gig thing where it's like, oh, I've just snapped a string and I better just do it quickly.
Yeah, you got that.
But then I just forget. So, but I do remember doing an acoustic gig with someone probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and I'd done like maybe 3 or 4 gigs with this person, same PA setup, same everything, and it was fine. Do the gig, and then I had rocked up to this 4th gig, just changed the strings, plugged in. She goes, what did you do to your guitar? It sounds amazing today. I was like, oh shit, literally just changed the strings. Maybe I'll do that a bit more often. But I haven't, so bad habits.
Of course not.
No, you just get it. My whole life is just getting away with bad habits until it gets me really in trouble. So that's one of them.
I mean, that's your strength that you're following in life, right?
Yeah. Not sweaty hands.
So yeah, those floral gems, that just as a little thing, I think they're fantastic instruments. So yeah, that's mate, if that's not a comprehensive kind of rundown of your career as from hobbyist to guru, is.
I think the other thing that and I know we were just chatting about this briefly before we kind of hit the record button, but the decision to do something on YouTube was a big part of that journey, I think. Right. And I forced myself to do it because I was like, I didn't naturally go, hey, I want to do that. It was just sort of like, it seemed like an obvious thing that I just had to do.
Yep.
As part of trying to get some exposure and get some sort of profile. And I had some encouragement from a few friends that said, you totally have to do it, you know. And because I thought if I didn't do that, I would just be some random dude in Australia.
Yeah,
which still am, but you know, like.
No, I know exactly what you mean though. There's nothing that sets you apart. Yep. It's you need to have some sort of hook, and like I've seen amps that you've modded come up for sale on Facebook recently, and it's like, hey, here's the video of the exact mod that's done to it, and it's like the video aside, but the reputation that you've developed now from that, like it exists if nothing else. It's very positive. So
and for me, it's like becoming aware of your amps was cool, but then I just started binging your YouTube channel because it was so interesting, and it was very. And it's a thing, right? Where it's probably, I think with Australia and New Zealand, it's their greatest superpower and their greatest weakness. It's a superpower because we're very approachable and humble in general. And part of the culture is that, you know, if someone starts getting a massive ego, you're like, mate, don't be a wanker.
No dickheads.
But that's also the thing, I think, from probably a business perspective and a career perspective that can hold us back. It's that tall poppy syndrome where it's like,
oh, totally.
Oh, yes, heard it. You know, there's this story that was relayed to me about Colin Hay. Back in the day when right before Men at Work sort of took off, and Cole, you know, he'd catch the train somewhere once a week, and he'd always see this guy, and then they kind of became buddies. And the sort of story, the long, the short, I'll paraphrase it, was like, oh, Cole, heard you're in a band, mate. Good on you. Go for it, Cole. Love it. And then a couple of weeks later, he runs into this guy's like, oi, Cole, one of my mates saw your band. Apparently you're pretty good. Oh, keep it up, Cole. Love it. And then, you know, sees him a few weeks later, and it's like, Cole, mate, oh, I came to your show on the weekend. Amazing, Cole. I loved it. You had so many people in there. The songs are great. Oh, Cole, all the best. And he's like, went to America. You know, we had some songs on the radio. We came back and see the same guy after a couple of months, and he goes, oi, Cole, heard your song on the radio. Fuck you, Cole. You're a wanker. That's Australia. That's how it works.
Fucking 100%.
That's all you need to know about our culture and everything. Yep. It's like, you know,
it is, you know, it's just it's so true. And there's I find it, look, I'm not going to suggest for a second that I'm at that level or anything like that, but I feel that there's a certain market here that won't buy my amps because it's Australia.
Yeah,
it's weird, isn't it?
That's interesting. I've not thought of that at all.
It's
like
totally true. The truth. I know it, and I do sell amps locally. There's a whole lot of people that are, you know, I've built for and done work for, and they're awesome. But there is this thing. I don't know it. I know who the people are.
Oh, right. Okay.
It's Australian. Why would you buy that? Like, buy US, much better. You know, like.
Yeah, it's such a strange dynamic. It is one of those things. If you haven't grown up with it, if you grow up with it, you don't realize it until you become an adult. And if you haven't grown up with it, you're like, what do you mean, bro? Just promote yourself. And I mean, for us, going to the States, like we played gigs in the US before we'd ever played on the East Coast. That's how.
Really?
Yeah. It was like straight from Perth to
Oklahoma.
Yeah, it was there. But the culture shock for us was everyone. You were in a band. People just we met this dude who he saw us play, and we kept joking that he kind of looked like Troy. So and this is the perfect clash of cultures right here. He walks up, he's like, "Hey, bro, you are awesome, man. Hey, dude, your hair, you look like Steve Vai on stage. Yeah, you know, I'm so and so, and I'm awesome." Yeah,
that's right.
That was literally the conversation. I'm a great guitar player too. Like, you're really good. I'm a great guitar player. Starts telling me all about himself. And then our response is, oh, you look just like our mate. Hey. Which I don't think went over pretty well.
He does too, man. We'll send you a picture. He looks...
If they're listening to this, you know, that's my main takeaway from this was it was like, I was very put off, and I now realize it's just a cultural thing. Where
so he was prepared to tell you, like, straight off the bat.
Straight up, I'm a guitar player. I'm really good, which you would never do here.
No way.
No way.
It's everyone would just go, "You're a dickhead."
Yeah, are you good? Not really. You know, people are like, "Oh, okay, cool." It is. It's like, "Oh, you think you're good" is such a thing. So, but yeah, once you get over yourself in that way, which I'm sure you've been through with YouTube, because the majority of your audience is probably American as well. Once we got over that in the States, it was like, oh man, it was hard coming back, put it that way. Anytime I'm over there, it's like, I think I know how to balance out the like, hang on, don't talk about yourself. I'm like, no, do talk about yourself, because if you ask for stuff, you get it over there.
So this is some advice. This is some advice for me when I fly out to the US on Sunday.
Yeah,
which is like rock up and say I'm fucking awesome.
Yeah,
get printed on a t-shirt, Jason Tong. Fucking awesome.
Just say, everyone you meet, you just say, "Don't you know who I am?"
Yeah, come on, like
that's what Leon does. As soon as he comes back from tour, he just walks around. You know, just
do you know who I think I am?
Cock first. Everyone just look at me.
Exactly.
You know, the YouTube thing though, I had to figure out, and Leon, I'll be interested in your answer to this question, right? But I remember it right at the beginning, like, okay, I'm going to do this. And I thought, what am I going to do? Like, what content, like, what am I going to do? Just like play my amps or something? And I remember I listened to a lot of Pete Thorne's podcasts, like his live stream stuff. And he was asked this question by some random guy, right? Like, what's your advice for starting the YouTube channel? And his advice was, try and think of something that you can do that others aren't. Like, don't just do the same thing that other people are doing. And I remember listening, I heard that and I went, oh, like, what might that be? And I thought, oh, I know. I'm going to show people how to mod. No one was doing it.
It's surprising, yeah. Because there's a couple of other amp guys that do rip stuff apart, but it's not really in a modding way, is it? It's more just diagnosing problems and, you know.
Yeah, it's kind of repair. It's a lot of repair stuff.
The rant of like.
Yeah, the rant. And look at this shit amp, you know, there's a bit of that going on.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's hey, it's a bit of a thing. YouTube is gamified to promote that, but you know, I like for Headfirst, it's just like, hey, here's how you do this thing. There's probably a lot of people. There's so many things that you've like looked at on there where it's like, what is this mod really? Well, it's this many components, and it works because of this. But it's also really clever because of this, which I love. It's like, man, you're just straight into it. And then the best thing, Jason, is you can play guitar, which is the other element on there. Like, you just pick up your guitar and you start playing, and it's like, that sounds like guitar. You know, literally everything you play is just like, man, that's what that amp should sound like. Awesome. You know, because sometimes there's that deficit between maybe someone can play, but, you know, they don't really know what they're doing when it comes to the mod side, or maybe they know about the mods, but you know they just, the playing's not up to snuff or something. So I think for you, like, you hit the sweet spot.
Yeah, that was actually the thanks for that, man. I appreciate that. It was the playing thing was one of those get over yourself moments as well, because again, in the early parts of kind of starting the channel, I'd do what probably maybe people do when they start out, and you end up re-recording things. Oh, that's not good enough, and then I do it again. Oh, that's not good enough, you know. And now I just like, oh, fuck it, I just try and just roll the thing. And because otherwise you spend it takes
when it comes to my own playing, it's just like, yeah, whatever. You know, because I've put things up where I'm like, oh, yeah, this is sick.
Oh, bad. I'm looking at it going, oh, my God. I don't
leave the comment about how garbage it is. And you're like, oh. And then other stuff where I'm like, I should probably redo this.
You know, like for people like I watch you play, right? I watch a lot of your videos, and I never see anything that's bad. All I see is like a dude that really knows how to play like really well. I'm like, when I watch me, I go, oh my God, that was terrible. You know?
All I hear is string noise, and like, you know, it's a bit of a thing where you constantly, I can blame this guy over here because he's had to record me a bunch of times and being like, yeah, you know what you were doing? You were way ahead, and now you're way behind, and you're also making a weird noise. And why are you holding the pick like that? You never do that when you play live. So,
yeah, I don't know if I don't want to like throw Leon under the bus, but I think like Leon has been able to rip since he was like 16, like the fastest stuff that you've ever heard.
Just one of those guys that could do it.
Yeah, but Leon did not know how to play rhythm guitar till he was in his mid-20s. Yep. So, like, there's a difference between like playing the chords and like playing the chords and making it sound like a song. And because even Leon, like, there's stuff that I've heard you play on your channel in the last couple of years. It's like, man, that's like, it's a subtle thing, but it makes so much difference to the I think the way that you hit the strings has changed. The way that you're dialing the tone has changed, and and it's just you try stuff and you learn and you get better. It's just a part of it, aging into it.
One of the earliest videos I think I did a video with my DSL. Mm-hmm. I started making tutorial videos on YouTube for the AX8 because I figured out how to do a QuickTime screen record, and I just do them and upload them and be like, I'm never listening to that again. If someone listens to it and finds it useful, great, but it's mostly because I figured out how to do something.
Is that how you started? Leon?
Videos still up. You just look up oldest videos on there. There's probably some videos from back when you could just upload a clip that you wanted to send to your mates. You put it on YouTube. Yeah. It was funny because I remember Troy sent me a message. He was like, oh, that sounds pretty good. Like, what did you do? I was like, I just like put a microphone in front of it, kind of like I'd seen you do in the studio. So it gave me like a lot of confidence. It's like, that wasn't total garbage. Cool. I'll do some more of it. So yeah, it's funny, but the rhythm guitar thing's a big, that was a big thing. It's like, I think it's between Ryan and Troy that they're like, I had my influences when I was growing up. Like, I'd love to be able to do this aesthetic thing that Paul Gilbert does or Yngwie does. But when I started gigging, playing in a band with Ryan, who'd been doing it for a long time, sort of going, don't do that, do this. Like, just don't play G 10 different ways. Just play the one in the open position. Yep. And let it ring out. And basically it was like, hey man, like, listen to Malcolm Young, and that's what you need to do in a pub rock band when you play rhythm guitar. Just get the nail and the hammer and hit the nail with the hammer. Don't do anything else. And then recording with Troy was kind of like, being under the microscope and also having someone who could communicate clearly and succinctly what you were doing. It's like, this is what it means when you're rushing. And when you hold that chord, there's a weird overtone in there because you're fingering it. Like, there's things that you're not aware of. And once you hear them, you're like, of course, I'm never going to do that again in my life. Why would I?
And then you do it literally the next take and it's like, do it again.
Of course. And then I spend the next 4 hours doing it with you going.
Yeah. But unfortunately, that's that's how you get good at anything. It's just like practice. It's some of it is brute force. It's not like it clicks over. That goes for, I think, every skill. Actually, the one reason, there's several reasons, but I don't have a YouTube channel because I, A, am too lazy, but B, I'm so good at Pro Tools, right? I'll brag about that. I'm an excellent Pro Tools user and operator.
You're awesome.
I am.
Troy, you're a Pro Tools expert.
But I cannot fathom the concept of having to learn another computer program to like do video, and that's a big reason why I don't touch it. Is because like I like having to learn different terminology and like where does
there's the learning curve. For sure.
I don't have.
Why don't you use Final Cut Pro, Leon?
I used Final Cut for a long time. I got a new Mac and didn't want to have to pay for a license again, so I use DaVinci now, which did my head in because there's some slightly different shortcuts. But I did the thing which, this is my way of doing stuff. If I have a day with something, I'm fairly confident I can get to 51% ability on it, and then that's all I need. So I use Resolve now. The only thing that does me if I'm doing something in, like if I'm say doing a demo video and I make a track and I spend a lot of time in Pro Tools, then the shortcuts are slightly different to Resolve.
Yeah.
So I'll be in Resolve doing that and I hit the wrong thing so I get a bit clunky like that. But I reckon you could learn how to use Resolve in 4 hours, Troy. It's pretty easy.
Yeah, but I mean, think of all the YouTube videos I couldn't be watching in that meantime and the actual work I should be doing. So it's hard enough already. Like, Jason, I really, really enjoy your videos. And the one thing that is always a bummer for me is like when I look at how long they are, I'm like, I I need to find the right time to watch this because I want to concentrate on it. And that's not your fault whatsoever. It's like there's
too long.
Not too long because it needs to be that long to like actually give the information. I need more time in the day to like sit and watch it, and I just like that's why like at the gym I'll sometimes put it on then because I at least if I'm just like doing some cardio and stuff, it really helps. But that's like that's not a criticism. I don't mean to do that at all. Because
no, it's good. It's good. It's cool. Like the thing that I'm again, we just talked about this very quickly before we kind of hit the record button, but I'm already starting to think about what next to do with all of that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with the channel and that presence and that kind of, let's call it the education side. Because when I listening to that advice from that Pete Thorne podcast and go like, do something different, and that's why I was like, I should do something that's kind of a bit more around education.
Yep.
And then in amongst all of that, I can kind of like, expose my amps and go, hey, buy this thing, whatever, right? But have it kind of the main theme around a passion for working on these amps and understanding them and being able to maintain them or mod them yourself. And people just want to understand how stuff works.
Yeah, man.
A video course would be like, if you ever had the time to sit down and do something like that, it'd be a lot of work, but that's something that, would be valuable information, even if it was just like amp maintenance and repair.
Well, man, I'd love some advice like on this, right? Because I know, Leon, you've done you got your Patreon thing going and other things going, and I'm thinking about like, so in mid-June, I'm finishing up with my current day job, which I do. I work 4 days a week. So if anyone doesn't realise, no, I don't do Headfirst full time. It's 3 days a week, and I work 4 days a week in my software job.
And the other on the weekend, that makes 9 days. Hang on.
4 plus 3. There's no weekend. Yeah. The weekend is on the bench with a soldering iron and like, or here in front of my computer designing circuit boards and crap like that, right? So so it's pretty rare to have a day where I do nothing at the moment.
Yeah.
But in mid-June, I'm finishing up with my day job and doing Headfirst full time.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Which is a big milestone. Yeah, like I'm pretty excited about it because I just want to get to that point, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I've got 5 weeks and I just want to get to that point now. And my mind's just racing with all the things that I want to do. But I've definitely got thoughts and ideas, but I haven't kind of formed them up about how it might work and what the content might look like. But I think there is something there. Like you got to look at Bruce Egnater,
mm-hmm.
who I follow online, and Bruce is my little DIY builders group on Facebook, the Headfirst DIY builders group, right, which is all the kind of people that are keen to tinker with amps and so on. There's about 2,000 people in that group now.
Oh,
wow.
And so a lot of the guys. So I started that Facebook group up about 2.5 years ago because I was getting emailed questions by people that had bought one of my little boards, even like this is a little effects loop PCB, I bought this board from you. How do I install it? And answering that same question over and over again gets pretty tiresome on email. And particularly when you go to the trouble of answering it, that only one person's going to see it. It's like, this is crazy. So I set up a group and said to everybody and I still do it because people still ping me looking for one-on-one support, and I say, put your question in the group
mm-hmm.
and I'll answer it there. And what, of course, has happened is you've got knowledgeable people that are members of that group and love to contribute. And so 90% of the questions that get posted on there get answered by other people who already know, or they've gone through that learning curve, or maybe they've built that amp with one of my boards, whatever. But Bruce joined that group. Back to Bruce Egnater, he joined that group like about a year ago. Dave Friedman's in the group as well. And occasionally Dave will answer a question, which is like just blows my mind. Because someone, particularly as a couple of my boards are a bit Friedman-like, which is how I met Dave. I'll tell that story as well if you want to hear it.
That story.
So, but Bruce is in there all the time. He's answering questions like a lot. He's really active, like, and he'll say, and he'll always trying to turn it into a learning situation.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I can
How
tell
old is
with
he?
Bruce.
Is he 60s?
Oh yeah, he'd be.
So
I don't actually know. I'm going to guess 60 maybe.
I feel like there's other people I know that they get to that age and they have an outlet to teach, and that's just something that it becomes a passion, and that's great. That needs to happen. Like there's local, like I can think of a couple of local electronics guys who they are like the gurus. Like when you talk about guys that that know everything, it's like how can someone be so good at like not knowing all this stuff, and they're gonna die at some point, unfortunately, and that knowledge is just going to be gone.
Yeah.
So as much that can be put out there in whatever forum as possible is really important. So, Bruce and the Daves in the world.
Yeah.
It's just
and he's actually, Bruce has reinvented himself. Like the Ignitor brand, I think he sold off to boutique amps, and now he's got his E3, I think he calls it.
Yeah, because I've seen him. He's got workshops for building as well. I've seen that logo.
Yeah, I was going to say, right? So he's got this whole kind of thing going there where he's doing amp building classes. But I noticed that, like, literally just last week, he's advertising. He's doing a 2-day work. Well, it's not an amp building workshop. It's actually a class, and it's like in the classroom with him up on a whiteboard or whatever. And he's got one set for like in August and another one in September. Mm-hmm. And these things are selling out. Mm-hmm. And he's just running them. And he's based in just out of Detroit somewhere or something. Okay. He's in Michigan somewhere. And I'm like, okay, well, we all know the US is a massive market, but still, he's a long way from anywhere. He's got his own little, people in that area will drive in and go to these classes. But in Sydney and Melbourne, we've got, big populations. But I'm thinking like, no, I wouldn't do a classroom. I'd do online. Mm-hmm. I've got to think about how to translate that. There's clearly a market for it.
Yep.
And if you can translate it into something that's in this medium, just like people do with guitar lessons.
Yep.
I mean, Leon, you've done this stuff, right? So I'm going to call you.
This is my every day. Exactly.
I'm going to call you for some advice in this area, man, because I think there's so many different ways to do this, and you've probably been down this pathway, right? Well, I know you have. So,
mate, anytime, you know where to find me.
Yeah, I do.
Before we go down the Dave, how you and Dave kind of hooked up, I'm really curious. There's a few, we have some questions about amps.
Yeah.
Yeah, shoot.
I think it'd be cool because you've pulled a lot of amps apart, and especially the kind of Marshall-based stuff, which is, for me, I grew up playing Marshalls. I still love that sound. It's still kind of, your sound of rock and roll, so to speak.
100%.
My question is plexis. Okay, it's a twofold thing. There's two components in there. The impact of the bright cap and the bright cap value. Well, we've spoken about this before, but I think it's a really fascinating thing and what it does. And also, and this is a thing that I notice in like fractal world, right? Because all of these things are modeled and modifiable. And you kind of have people who are like, they're boogie fans, and they're like, they love how smooth the distortion is. And then they play a Marshall and they're like, there's this thing, this like a raspy, there's this magical thing. So I'm curious to know, and you see this as like, oh, this is the forgotten law of Marshalls, like what like the cathode follower has to do in terms of like, one, what it is and how it contributes to the character of that old Marshall sound. Because it's something that like a Mark Series amp doesn't have. And I'm curious as to how big a factor that is in that characteristic, like rasp.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So the bright cap thing, let's do that first. Yeah. It is the most common mod for old plexis that I've had in here, and I've had a lot now actually that have come through. A lot of stuff through the 70s. Mm-hmm. I actually just posted a video a couple of days ago. I had
so good.
66, 67.
I watched that this morning.
JTM 45 transitional. Yeah, that was a special, man. That was like, I took photos of that and sent it to Dave, actually.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. We'll talk about the Dave stories in a sec. But because he's been in more old Marshalls and we've had hot dinners, like he's a great reference of like, man, check this out, and just verifying the age of all of that and so on. But the bright cap is the most common mod that's happened to Marshalls over their life is to have the bright cap cut out.
Mm-hmm.
People call it, clip it or snip it. Mostly they've just been soldered out and taken out, right? That one component, because of course, mostly people find them horrendously harsh and bright, and they just go, I just can't deal with it. And then they get the bright cap taken out and they go, oh my God, now I can kind of use the volume, because a Plexi is a non-master volume amp,
mm-hmm.
right? As we know, right? It's just got one control, and that's, if you think of it like a 2203 or 2204, JMP or JCM 800, they were the kind of the first real master volume amps that Marshall did. And then all of a sudden you had a gain and a master volume. Well, a Plexi is like having the master volume on 10 and then just using the gain control as your volume. That's all you've got.
Yep.
That's all it is, because there is no master volume. It's just like not even there. Master volumes are positioned almost always as the very last thing in the preamp before it hits the phase inverter. And the phase inverter is you got to think of the phase inverter as part of the power amp.
Right.
Even though the phase inverter is a preamp tube.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have post-phase inverter masters as well.
You can.
Yep.
Yeah, and you'll only kind of see those in a Plexi. And I can explain the reason for that too when we get there. Back to the bright cap. So in around about kind of the late 60s and then into the early 70s, Marshall started to use a 4700 picofarad bright cap, which is it's a high value. Like, if you think about the JTM 45s had a bright cap, 100 picofarad.
Right.
And that just this bit of sparkle on top.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can hear it, and it's like a nice airy kind of sparkle on top in the treble channel. The normal channels never had bright caps. You think about, you got the treble channel and the normal channel. And then, people wanted more aggression, more distortion out of these things. So they started to release these amps with 4700. So it was nearly 5,000 picofarad.
Nearly 50 times the value.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's the experience you get in an old 4-holer when you plug into the treble channel and you just crack the volume on and it goes, poof. It just like straight away, it's just loud. And you just go, fuck, like how do people use these things, right? The only way to use them is that you've got to bring the volume up, because the bright cap is so large that it's letting through all of your high end and then into the mid-range.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Whereas a much lower value bright cap, so like 100 picofarad, 250, even 500, you're getting a nice top end, but the volume is still kind of workable. As you bring in the volume, the bright cap has less and less impact.
Yep.
It's basically a big high pass filter.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if that's sort of what it does.
It's basically exactly what it is, right? It's a cap and a pot, and all a pot is a variable resistor.
I was going to say, so it's an RC network.
Yeah, exactly what it is, right? And if you actually think about how the bright cap is wired, it's wired between the input to the pot and the wiper, which is the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine the pot has 3 lugs on it.
Yep.
It's got the input, the wiper, and then the ground. And the bright cap goes between the input and the wiper. So as you move that pot, you're changing the position of where the wiper is. You're changing the resistance that's in parallel with that capacitor.
Mm-hmm.
And when the resistance is 0, the cap has no impact.
Yep.
Because if the resistance is 0, then the audio signal goes all the way through that path, and the cap has no impact. 0 resistance is when you put the pot on 10. Right? Maximum 10.
Goes through.
It goes through. Cap has no impact. Now, as you start backing the pot off, the resistance is getting higher and higher, and so more signal will be shunted through the cap.
Mm-hmm.
And the cap basically has a cutoff point. a frequency cutoff. And so you choose the value of the cap to where you want that cutoff point to be in the frequency spectrum. And 4700 is, back to the Marshall value, is high. So the frequency cutoff is it's lower. It's in the mid-range.
Right, okay.
And
which is, I mean, to me, one thing when I think of like a driven JTM 45, which I own a JTM 45 and I really like it, but it's definitely not a plexi. It's got a totally different thing going on. It's like creamy sounding. That's the way I would describe it. Whereas a plexi is like kind of interesting, because I think like a lot of guitar players think they know what a plexi sounds like until you play one.
Yep.
And then you're like, I didn't realize it had so much gain.
Oh, yeah.
We spoke about it yesterday. Like,
yeah.
It's like what some of these things you just like what you get from a YouTube video and the experience of sitting in front of an amp and dialing it in is very, very different. And
it's a whole different animal, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so with that level of bright cap, you need to get the volume up to about 6 for it to sound good. Because anything lower than that, the bright cap is having too much impact, and it just sounds. There's no bottom end, there's no kind of lower mids or whatever in the signal. And so it's at that point that the amps become, not unusable, but then you get into like, I need an attenuator or a power station or a post-phase inverter master, like you mentioned, Leon, because 100, anyone has tried it, right? 100-watt plexi on 7, man, it's a blunt instrument, It's like, where are you going to use it?
Yep. It is physically assaulting, It's like
yeah.
level of like, okay, that's people. You can't be around this too long.
My Marshall at 7 shakes all of the panels off the wall in my live room, which is really funny because it's happened a few times. I'll just I'll do a session, I'll walk in afterwards like, oh Jesus Christ, it looks like a bomb's going off in here. But yeah, it's hard. And also because, I mean, I've got a 100-watt Marshall, but that's not putting out just 100 watts, right? It's like probably a bit more than that. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is true.
So
yeah, particularly if it's a kind of if it's one of the ones that has reasonably healthy kind of plate voltage, you'll easily get 110 to 120
wow.
out of those amps. Yeah, you can do. And it's also like when people talk about power, that it's clean RMS. So you can actually put it I test this with almost every amp that comes through. You put a sine wave into it. I've done this on a few videos. You see me do it.
Yeah, so
and the sine wave,
I think.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you can basically you want to set it up so there's no gain in the preamp because you don't want that wave distorting and clipping. You want it to go through the amp clean, and you're testing how much power the power stage is delivering, and you can wind it up until the point where the wave starts to square off and then back a bit. As long as and you can work out the power, and you put a healthy 100-watter on the bench and do that, you'll easily get 100 and maybe a bit more. But then when you drive it into clipping, it'll deliver more.
Yeah.
But it's distorted.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So yeah, with the phase inverter and the cathode follower, and these are the like esoteric bits of the amp, right? Where it's like they're there for, there's technical reasons that they're in there, but there's the unintended consequence that they contribute to the sound of the amp, right?
Yeah. So the cathode follower. So in a standard Marshall, like a 1959 Super Lead Plexi or a 1987 JTM 45, all that stuff, and even into the 2203, 2204 era, they always have 3 preamp tubes, don't they? Always 1, 2, 3. In later years, they got more adventurous, right, with all kinds of shit going on. But good old Marshalls are 3 preamp tubes, and one of those is the phase inverter. That's V3, if you like. V2 is always where the cathode follower is, and it's one side of V2. And all a cathode follower is, because people use the term a lot, but probably have no idea what it is. It's people.
There's two of us here that have no idea. Plural, yeah.
You have to stop me about going too far in the weeds here. But
Please keep going. I need to know. I need to know.
Do you want me to tell you like what it is?
Yeah, go on.
What it does?
Can I just say,
technical descriptions of it before and sort of semi-understood, but I also don't really know what's going on. So you have a bit of a knack for explaining this stuff.
Can I just sort of drop in? Like, I feel like the way that I learn best is to know every detail. Like, I feel like the more knowledge I have about a signal path and what the components do, the more I really can use the information. So like or use the piece of equipment. So I had this conversation with one of my students like 2 days ago with studio stuff, where it's like, sometimes you got to gloss over stuff because it's really either super boring or it's just so advanced. But I think where we're all at, or Leon and I are at, we're ready for this. So
that's awesome. Okay. In a 12AX7, there's 2 gain stages or triodes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. People talk about gain staging, how many gain stages, blah, blah, blah. No one knows what they are, probably. But inside a 12AX7, there's 2. And they're identical, and you can use them however you like.
Right.
And each triode only has 3 connections, wires, right?
Yep.
3 connections that's needed to make it work. It has the plate, sometimes called anode, often just plate. It has, and I'm drawing it like this because that's how you'll see it on a schematic. You'll see the kind of the plate resistor, or the load resistor, it's sometimes called, kind of at the top. And you'll see the triode kind of symbol. And then there's a cathode resistor. So you got the plate and your cathode resistor, and then the grid. And the grid is the input, right? You can think of the grid, it's your guitar signal hitting it.
Okay.
So your guitar signal is an AC waveform, like an audio waveform. Yeah, it's AC. And that grid is like a tap. It's controlling the flow of electrons through the tube.
Right.
The grid is that. It's exactly what's all it is, right? And by doing that, you're amplifying the signal because you're taking a small control grid signal, which is your guitar, and making it into a much larger amplitude, much larger voltage by running it through this triode or this gain stage. Plate resistor, cathode resistor. And then you need to figure out, once you've done that, you go, okay, I've amplified my signal. Fantastic. How do I get it out of there so I can then move it into the next part of the circuit?
Yep.
And there's this crazy mix of DC and AC voltages that coexist at the same time, right? On a tube stage, on a triode. Because people talk about plate voltage.
Yep.
You hear this B plus plate voltage, blah, blah, blah. That's the voltage that's sitting at the top. So you've got a ground, in the circuit ground. The cathode's connected to the ground. You've got the plate resistor connected to the B plus, which could be 300, 400 volts DC. And then you've got your amplified signal. Now I need to get it out of there. The way you do that is through a coupling capacitor.
Okay.
The coupling cap, I'll get to the point about cathode followers in a second.
Keep going, mate. This is great.
Yeah, so the coupling capacitor, which looks like one of these, you go, is a Synergy.
There you go.
Mustard cap, like that. That allows the guitar signal, the amplified guitar signal, to pass through it, and it blocks the DC.
Yep.
Okay.
Right? DC can't pass through a capacitor because it's like, capacitor's like 2 plates, if you like. But it allows AC to travel through. Now, in all non-cathode follower, let's call it normal gain stage setups, this coupling capacitor is connected up to the plate resistor at the top. And when you look at a schematic for a guitar amp, you'll see this. You'll see all these lines coming off the top of the triode. That's called plate fed.
Okay.
And you hear about plate fed tone stacks.
I've heard that, yeah.
Yeah. So that's what that is. It's coming off the top. And the Mark Series, all the Fender stuff, and Mark Series amps and so on, even the early 5150 EVH.
Interesting.
Marshall Silver Jubilee amps.
Oh, okay.
Which is the kind of that's bedrock for the Wizard stuff. The Wizards are all based on this.
I'd heard that before,
yeah.
Didn't know that.
They're all plate-fed tone stacks.
Very interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and it is interesting because Marshall kind of went like left field there, right? Moved away from what they'd been doing. Now, when you take a signal off a plate, it's a high impedance signal.
Okay.
And this is important because when you feed a high impedance signal into a tone stack, you'll lose a lot of signal. It's lossy.
Right. Okay.
And tone stacks are passive. They're just passive networks, you know, in guitar amps. I know you can have active EQ, right? But let's talking about the kind of the Marshall stuff here.
Yeah.
So what a cathode follower is, it's exactly the same setup, but rather than having the coupling cap come off the plate, it comes off the cathode at the bottom.
Okay.
That's called a cathode follower because it's off the cathode resistor. And the difference is that it's now a low impedance signal.
Okay.
So it can drive through a passive network and hardly lose any signal.
Right.
It's the exact same reason why effects loops and amps are a cathode follower on the send.
Right.
And then a gain stage on the return to get the signal back up again.
Right. Understand.
Because you need to push a low impedance signal out across an effects loop. Otherwise, you'll get signal loss and the loop will be like a tone sucker, you know? You know how people like this loop sucks?
The first time that's ever made sense to me as well. It's like, so that's, okay, it's less, it's not lossy. And then you hit the tone stack, which obviously between different amps is a different beast, but that ability to do that means you, and then my question in something like a classic Fender or a Mark series they're like cascading, I'll say like a Mark series, cascading gain stage and stuff, but the tone stack is not, that's placed somewhere else in the circuit compared to
very early, right?
Yeah, so you don't have, is that because of that plate-fed impedance issue?
It is. It's very lossy. It's I think it's one of the reasons why, if you think about the kind of that classic Fender blackface kind of, it's an awesome clean tone, yeah. And mostly that's just a single gain stage straight into the tone stack. Mm-hmm. Like it's so early. If you think about a Marshall, even like a JCM, like a 2203, whatever, right? It's 1, 2, 3 gain stages, cathode follower, then tone stack.
Right. Okay.
Even a Plexi is 1, 2 gain stages, cathode follower, tone stack. Mm-hmm. And you think about these old kind of, the blackface kind of thing or whatever. It's 1 gain stage, plate fed tone stack. So you're actually you're shaping this tone of the signal very early, but you're also losing a lot of amplitude very early. Right. And then it'll have a recovery gain stage to kind of bring the signal back up again. And then it's basically straight into the power amp. And so it's little wonder that it's like super clean because the signal doesn't have a chance to kind of start overdriving. The way you get overdrive is that you take the output of one and hit another. Mm-hmm. And you take the output of that and you hit another, and then you start clipping.
Yep.
You start to push the tube to its limits, the preamp tube to the limits of its operating point, and then it'll square off, and that's how you get overdrive distortion.
Yep.
And it's where the tone stack is in the circuit will impact whether it actually makes any difference. Like I saw your video, Leon, on how to dial in a Mark series amp was awesome, which is like, okay, I understand that this tone stack is very early. It's not going to work like how I might dial in like a dual record or whatever. And so you just like basically cranked it. My memory of what you did in that video, basically.
Yeah, crank the treble and keep the bass.
Crank the treble and that, yeah. I actually tried that. I brought up the model because I don't own one of those amps, but I brought up the model of my Axe Effects and tried your trick, and I was like, fuck, finally I can get it to sound good.
I know. Isn't that it's so funny, man. I think you've like changed a lot of lives with those videos, man.
Well, it changed my life. I think I read it on the Fractal forum because Cliff posted it, and he was like, here's how you do it, kids. And I was like,
jump on my back, guys. Come with me.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, all of a sudden I was like, yeah, here we go. This is it. This is the
and it's so funny that then those amps have a graphic EQ in them, you know, where it's like, but we still want to shape the sound. So I guess the Mark 1s and, you know, Mark 2Cs were made without EQs at times as well. Like we know someone who has one without the EQ, and it's like they put it up for sale, and I was like, it'd be cool to have a 2C plus, but I know I could buy the Boogie 5 band, but I'm just going to roll with the Mark 4 because it's got the GEQ. Like, you kind of need that for that sound. What you've done, Jason, is you give me this mental picture now. So I'm very much like an object style person, where it's like, if I can see the picture of it in my head, I kind of know how it works, and I can see a picture of a tube in my head and then where it's getting tapped off. And that's
if you go and have a look at some Marshall, I'm glad it kind of landed, because I was halfway through that I was going, oh my god.
No, I got it. I was with you the whole time too. So.
Go and have a look at some schematics, right? And this is the thing that I find really it's not maybe fascinating. I don't know, but I like with all the DIY guys that I help out with their builds. They've bought boards or whatever and from me, and help them out on that forum or the Facebook group and so on. So many folks can only go from a wiring diagram, and they can't.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
You know, with like a layout, like Nick has on his website, right? He has the best layouts in the business. His layouts are awesome. But translating that into a schematic, you know, some people just can't kind of make the mental jump to like seeing that, well, lines on a schematic, it's the same as lines on your layout.
Yeah.
It's just connections and wires, you know, it's just laid out kind of differently. But if you go and look at those Marshall schemes, you'll see it. You'll see a cap that's been tapped off the cathode resistor. It's always 100K cathode follower. It has no plate resistor, 100K cathode, and then you see coming off it as a basically a connection that goes straight to treble, bass, and middle pots, the tone stack, and you'll see it straight away.
There's a guy on YouTube. He's a professor at a university, Aaron Lanterman, that's his name. But I think he does a course for undergrads at this university on like guitar amp and pedal electronics. So he's got a bunch of lectures, and they are just like, you know, here I am on a on a whiteboard just laying it all out. It's, you know, it's for science and maths students. But it's really interesting seeing his take on all this, because he's kind of like, let's have a look at this circuit, you know, for this particular pedal, this particular amp, and like, what do these symbols mean? And then here's the math for it, and this is why it works, or this is why they've chosen to do it this way. It's his stuff's, if you're not aware of it, it's really
no, I should check it out. Send me a link or whatever.
Yeah, we'll do. It's it's for university students, so it's drier than what you do, but it's kind of like it'd be like a cool compliment.
That does sound cool.
And he has stuff that's just unrelated to guitar amps as well. There's like a bunch of free lectures, and it's great.
It talks a lot about footy as well. Dragon Ball Z. That's why we like him so much.
Right. Okay.
You had some questions piggybacking off all of this, right?
I do. I think I'll just say as well, I think like talking about the DIY community and all that, because this is a situation that I have. Like, there's a lot of foundation knowledge I just don't have. So I can make the jump from a schematic to like an actual circuit, or like looking at a board or whatever, with a bit of help. But yeah, it's just you know, I think Leon, you was talking about like like what does this mean and what does that mean? It's like basic stuff, but if you haven't had that like class 1 of basic electronics, which so many of us haven't had, it's really tough. It's like that's the situation where maybe you don't go out and buy your first like kit to put together, because you know, you obviously will know the dangers of it if you're not sort of aware. And again, that's why I haven't done it. I did very basic electronics, but what stuck for me was how to solder. So that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
And how to wire a mic cable. But Sorry, what were you going to say, Jason?
Yeah, because it was hard to find, because when I was going through that learning curve of you know, kind of digging into the distant memories of electronics that I'd had from, you know, studying it 20 years ago or whatever, but then kind of applying that into, guitar amps and how do I make these things sound better or mod them or whatever. And you're looking around for resources, like, what can I kind of learn from? How do you, you just try and absorb anything. And it's a combination of trial and error and tinkering yourself, whatever, right? But then you get on the internet and you try and find videos or you try and find resources. And I've already mentioned SLO clone forums was a great learning ground. But I really struggled. I couldn't find anywhere that just described some of the things that I thought were complex, but described them in easier terms or easier language.
Yeah, not aimed at like university level sort of things.
Well, just trying to going just the conversation we just had about a gain stage, and kind of breaking it down to like that, because that's how I understand things too. I'm like,
yeah, right.
When you just said, Leon, that's how you understand. I'm like, I'm the same. If I can picture it and kind of like, okay, now I can kind of understand how this thing works. Getting it explained simply was just not something that I could find. I could find lots of resources that explain how complex it was.
Yeah.
But hardly any resources to explain how simple it is.
I remember when I was at uni, and again, like very basic electronics knowledge, but I think I picked up a book in a bookshop one time that was about tubes. And just because I saw it there, I was like, I'm just going to have a look at this. And I think the first page said something about like, tubes are really hard to understand. And that was, and I was like, oh, okay, this is too hard. I'm not going to touch it from here. And
I know. And you think back to the cathode follower thing, right? We also have to remember, of course, that the Marshall DNA came from the Fender Bassman.
Yep.
And the Fender Bassman was a cathode follower.
Oh, okay.
And already there. And we also have heard a lot. Well, I certainly have heard a lot, right? That these early Fender designs came out of the original RCA tube manual.
Oh, okay, right.
You heard the story, right?
I had heard that, yeah. Where it's like, will that work?
Yeah, I don't think it's kind of like verbatim out of that, but I think that definitely those things, and like I could imagine someone tinkering with these plate-fed tone stacks and realizing that, which is the early Fender stuff, right? Realizing that, God, all the signals getting dissipated and lost through this resistive network, which is the tone stack, right? It's resistors and capacitors, pots and caps.
Yeah. So
it's very lossy. And then someone looking up this thing in the RCA tube manual, and it's like a cathode follower, a low impedance output. It'll drive a resistive network, with no signal loss. And someone go, try that,
Especially that to me is like, we'll probably never know, unless we could. I'm sure a lot of the original engineers who were there are probably passed away by now, but the general thing that I get from early Fender, especially, there is a bit of just like making it up there's a lot of making it up on the fly, where it's like, we need this thing. How do we do that? Can someone just maybe go and consult some references, and the first thing that we can think of that works will do it? And that just being a purely engineering goal, like we need this low impedance signal so it's less lossy, and we just put it out, and then people are, it's happening at a time when, there is no precedent for any of this. Like electric guitar is new, and rock and roll and country music it's just exploding. It's this very dynamic kind of thing. So it's like, you have this, the Bassman, whatever, plug into it. Is it a bass amplifier? I'll plug my guitar into it. Who cares? Because this is also I remember seeing an old video I had on VHS, and it was Jim Weeder, who I now know because of his association with Analog Man, and he's one of the people responsible for the King of Tone. And Jim, basically, this is a VHS that came out in the 80s, and it's about vintage gear. Like, he's got all this old vintage Fender stuff. And it's like that pedal show, but for amps and guitars, but in the late 80s. And it's literally him being like, here's a 1951 Telecaster. What they did in 1951 was this. Then him and his band like play some tunes from that era.
Oh, wow.
It must be on YouTube. I remember watching and being fascinated with it. It might even be earlier, actually, because in the video he says, I've been listening to this guitar player called Jimmy Vaughan. And Jimmy's got this brother, Stevie, who's like really good. You guys need to. So it's probably the early 80s. And literally he goes, oh, Stevie showed me this trick where like he uses a tube screamer and this amp, and that's how he gets his thing. And it's so weird. And I think he plays a bit of Cold Shot or something. And
no, that's awesome.
But it's in that like, Stevie does this Texas Shuffle thing really well, and I'm trying to do it. And Jim's a great guitar player, but yeah, there's that element of like all the design decisions that were just like, oh yeah, we just had a crack, and then, you know, that week this person came into the factory and needed a guitar, so they bought it and they went to the studio and they recorded that song, which came out the next week, which was a huge hit, you know. And that was we just put spring reverb in an amp, and so they did it, and then everyone wanted spring reverb. So that's, you know, all that stuff happening just in totally time, you know, is like there's and then that becomes the orthodoxy going forward.
Well, it's like I often wonder that back to the question about, you know, does the cathode follower have a particular sound or whatever, and you know, is it what makes a Marshall a Marshall? And you know, arguably yes, right? There's definitely, but then you go like, well, why do we like it?
Yeah.
Why do we think that sounds good, right? And my answer to that question in my own head is always because that's the sound we grew up listening to.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
it's we don't want to admit how like culturally mediated that thing that we kind of take for granted is. One of my students was saying this earlier this morning. I was showing them something, probably like a blues scale thing, and they just said, "Oh, that sounds like Pink Panther." And I was like, "Oh, let's learn that," you know, da-da-da-da-da. And he learned it, and he goes, "How does someone come up with something this perfect? It's so weird." But and I'm like, have you weren't around before this song didn't exist. You know, and also the time that it was made and Harry Mancini's influences, you can hear all this stuff coalescing. But yeah, it is. It's, you know, for Troy and I were talking about this yesterday, where it's like, you know, especially in the context like dual rectifiers and that sound, the like, you know, early 2000s, you know, Korn, Limp Bizkit, Linkin Park, Incubus, how at the time we were really into like the 88 MP1, this like at the time super dated sound. There was something happening and we weren't really part of it. But for me growing up, it was like my first memories of guitar music when I started playing were like Deep Purple and Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and Thin Lizzy, like rock music from the 70s, which was just that sound, you know. That's what I was like. And I remember hearing like Gary Moore and then Michael Schenker, and that just being like, oh, this is a Marshall sound. Is, you know, I never need any other sound in my life because all I want to do is what these guys are doing. And they were probably just using whatever was around.
Yeah, and probably, you know, and particularly if in a live setting, probably just what was ever in the back line that they turned up with.
Yeah, that's another good point
or whatever.
Well.
Like, I don't know. You're like, yeah. I loved all the early Gary Moore stuff when I remember being a teenager. You know, because I was a teenager in the 80s, and I owned an MP1 too, which I got in. I was about 20, which was about 1990.
And that would have been through what, like Pro Audio or somewhere like that?
I can't remember where I got it. It was in New Zealand.
Oh, okay.
And I can't remember how I got it. I remember
there was probably like 4 of them in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Do you know what?
Like,
there was a lot more of
6.
them around. Like I know a lot of people here that had them back then. Like Gibbsy had one and got rid of it because, you know.
Yeah, I want to say like every guitar player in Perth in the late 80s or early 90s will say, "Oh, I had an MP1." You know, like the first MP1 that I had was my dad bought it new whenever it came out, and then when he stopped gigging, he sold it to my uncle, and then like I got it back off my uncle when I started playing guitar because like, oh, you've got to try this thing, and that was when Troy and I met. It was like, have you heard of this thing called the 88 MP1? And we were both like, have we ever? You know?
And then now we have
I bought
6 of them between us. You bought yours new as well? Yep. Yeah. What were they worth back then? Like lots and lots?
Oh man, I can't remember. I remember it was all the money in the world, you know, like it's everything that I had. And then and I had the Troy, I think you might have one of these. I got the MP1 and I used it into the effects return of a Laney 100-watt head that I had.
Yep.
And the Laney head, it was the Pro Tube lead or something like that.
I don't have one of those heads, no, but I've
that
seen them come up. But
it was the first real tube head that I had.
Yep.
And it sounded cool, but it was only my memory of that amp. It was just one channel. Like it was just
okay.
Yeah,
it was like a JCM 800 or whatever, right? And it was gainy, and I needed clean tones to what I was doing at that time as well, not just drive all day. So I started the MP1
covers you had to do.
Yeah, correct. Exactly.
Just very quickly, that is such a thing here where if you're doing a pub gig in Perth, and especially in Kalgoorlie, because there's a lot of Kiwis who live there, you have
to do Slice of Heaven.
Yep.
Hey, bro, you guys play any Dave Dobbin?
No, it's Footwear Flats. Do you play Footwear Flats?
Yeah, actually,
Slice of Heaven. So, man, I tell you a story. I was gigging in a covers band in downtown Auckland in the early 90s with my 80A MP1.
Yes.
And if you know your Dave Dobbin history, you'll know that song was actually a collab between Dave Dobbin and a band called Herbs.
I didn't know that. Oh, right. I see. I did not know that.
Yeah, Herbs were a New Zealand kind of reggae soul kind of, Herbs kind of paved the way for bands like, I don't know, like Fat Freddy's Drop and Salmonella Dub, and I don't know if you.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Yeah, if you haven't heard Fat Freddy's Drop, check them out, man. They're freaking awesome.
Yeah, they're cool.
They're one of those. Yeah, as soon as.
But anyway, the Herbs guys they did all the background vocals on that.
Right.
You know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to try singing it.
No.
And they played. I think they played because they had a full band, right? They did all the things. But anyway, so one night we were gigging and the Herbs had played a gig in town. And they walked into the pub.
Wow.
And
legends.
Yeah, and of course the inevitable happened, right? They got up and played
Oh, right on.
Slice of Heaven with us. Yeah. It was hilarious.
That's awesome, man.
That is amazing. That is
it's a small place.
I think the last time we played in Cal, we had some Kiwis come in and do that. And there was maybe 7 or 8 of them, and they just started doing, the chant in that song. It's like Ryan just started playing. He kind of knew it, so he's like playing slap bass and Cam's playing along. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. But
there's a couple bits in that song. You have to sort of.
There is, yeah. You have to know it. They will.
Yeah, definitely, man.
Loving it. It was like they were just having a good time.
The pre-chorus in that song has a bit of a King's X thing to me as well. So I really appreciate that.
I hear you.
Accents. It's funny because the Kiwi. I mean, any American I speak to, they're like, "Oh wow, there's so much great Australian music. You must have such a great live scene." And you're like, "No, you've just heard all of the bands that have escaped the bubble." But I think New Zealand, much like their sporting teams and everything else, kind of punch above their weight. And it was funny because I did a video. I got a Crowther Audio Prunes and Custard recently. Yeah, just because I love the hot cake. I had one. I sold it. I bought it again. And I was like, I know there's another thing. So I found one on Gumtree and bought it. And someone said, they were like, that Datsun song called Harmonic Generator is named after that pedal. And that was like a band I hadn't heard of, I think, for, 10, 15 years. And
I reckon I saw them at Big Day Out back in a long time ago.
Yeah, that was such a Big Day Out band. And watching this clip of them live on, New Zealand daytime TV playing that song. And it's like, all the references in the song are to pedals and amps, and it's pretty funny.
That's cool.
It's like, you guys are just a bunch of gear nerds. So there's a fun. Speaking of celebrity interactions, I think we've got to the time now where you have to tell us how you met Dave Friedman's story.
Okay.
Because Dave is pretty central to, in my mind, in the global gear community, which is very rooted around YouTube. There's a everyone knowing who Dave was, and there's a post everyone knowing who Dave was. I remember Friedman amps, and I remember the Marsha branded amps.
Yep.
But it was if you knew, you knew kind of thing. But then it was sort of I want to say 2011, 2012, it was sort of here's the guy. Here's the iconoclast, the guy who has, He's worked with everyone. He makes the best sounding amps. You know, he's just the dude. And he was he was the dude for a long time before that. It's just like he kind of had that moment where he was able to cross over, I guess, kind of globally. So tell us about how you met Dave.
Yeah, look, Dave's he's been awesome actually in my, you know, in the interactions I've had with him, and which has been over a little while now. And he's an inspiration. You know, like if I think about how I got into doing what I'm doing with Headfirst, it was like, you know, there's a lot of connections back to Dave about like not only kind of the kind of tones that he was pulling from the amps that, you know, he was producing, but also that he kind of made it. I think he bought boutique amps, and I don't mean boutique amps distribution. I mean
the concept of it,
boutique modded amps. He brought them to the masses. You know, like before that, I think it was very, you know, it was a very kind of hard to get, very exclusive kind of, you know, I mean, finding those kind of amps, like, you know, I mentioned Mark Cameron before, or even Bogner's to a degree, very rare, you know, and he kind of, you know, laid the backbone, I think, of kind of like.
I think to me, the before Friedman, it was Soldano that was the big, like that was the, oh man, you know, if you've tried a Mesa and you think they're good, like Soldano is that's the ceiling. And then it was after that, it was kind of like Friedman was like, they were more available and more visible, and I guess they were.
He kind of showed how it could be scaled up. If you like, right?
Very much so,
and more
quantum leap,
far more accessible, I think.
Yeah,
and so that connection with Dave started with one day. You know, this is at least 3 or so years ago now. Waking up. And there's a PayPal order for one of my do-it-yourself circuit boards from Rack Systems.
Oh wow! Okay, the Rack Systems. I
was like, oh fuck! I was like, oh fuck! It's Dave Friedman. So
he's found me.
Emailed,
shit.
Yeah, totally. I was like, oh fuck! So I emailed him straight away and just said, you know, obviously noticed that you purchased a board. And I just said something like, you know, I don't know what you think of kind of what I'm doing with this stuff, but I said I'm not selling Friedman clones, just so we're clear. Someone could take this and do a DIY thing. I said it's a hobby, you know, hobby community. I hope that he would see that it was kind of a whole different market and a tiny percentage of people that might otherwise buy one of his amps, you know, really tiny. And he came back within hours and he said something like, yeah, he goes, I'm not sure how I feel about it, but it looks pretty cool. So he said, like getting Dave into a conversation, he will talk for ages. He's awesome, you know, but he's in the written word, and because I know he's probably got 500 emails per day in customer support and so on that he gets through. So it's really, you know, a few words and he's done. So it was like, that was that. And then, so we sent the boards off, and then 3 weeks later, when obviously the boards had got to his house in LA and he had a chance to look at them, he emailed me back and he said, received the boards, they look cool. Would you like to have a call? And I'm like, yes, straight away. Yes. One thing I've learned in this whole thing, you say yes to everything.
Oh man, that's the word. That's how I live. I say yes to everything.
Yeah. Yes, right. Yes. And so we did a call like this. It was a video call on Facebook Messenger actually, and went for an hour and a half. And he's just yak, chat. Mostly about amps and stuff, but you know, a few other things, you know. And he's like, kind of at the end, towards the end of it, he basically said, you know, like he goes, I think what you're doing is pretty awesome. And he goes, the boards look fantastic. And he goes, you know, we should keep in contact because, you know, maybe one day we'll do something together. And I'm like, hello? Yeah, that sounds amazing, you know?
Yep.
So I think he could see that I had some skills, right, around the circuit board design stuff that for a guy like him who's, a fantastic designer, and he's obviously got amazing ears, and he knows what to do to get to the sound that he's looking for. But he's not concerned with all the, the depths of AutoCAD and, printed circuit board design software and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's like,
So I was reading there's a forum I'm on called the Gear Forum. It's relatively new. Basically a bunch of people
unrelated.
Who got banned. Yeah, got a bunch of people who got banned from the Gear page.
I was going to say, not the Gear page. Yeah,
that's a whole saga. And yeah, they have like an Ask Me Anything thing. They had Santiago Alvarez on there, who is probably best known for designing the JVM and a bunch of other Marshalls, the AFD. And I was like, I know that name. Why do I know that name? And fair enough, it's someone, basically anytime I do a video with a Marshall, he'll be like, oh, hey, it's this, and this. I just never connected the dots that's the dude. Super cool. Like, and something that somebody said, it was along those lines of like, when you're working for a company like the Big M, not to be confused with
Macca's?
Masters and Shopping Milk or Macca's. Yeah. he kind of said, he's like, yeah, that's designing the amp and getting it to sound good is only one part. It's like you've got electrical compliance, got the manufacturing. He's like, we've got industrial engineers who, you got to build this to some kind of price point as well. It's like the design is like maybe 10% of the entire process. It's like, how do you make the chassis? How do you make the head shell? How do you meet all these standards for different markets? It's like that whole thing.
Totally.
And again, I think we're living in an age where there's one person actually can't do it all. Mm-hmm. So again, it's like someone like Dave has taken the Steve Vai route, where it's like, yeah, his ears, his control of the aesthetics and the design is probably second to none. But, he's surrounded himself with people who can handle all the other stuff.
Yeah. And he's a hard worker. Dave is like, you cannot fault the guy for the amount of effort. I mean, he's in that shop 6 days a week.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
In his shop in North Hollywood. And he still to this day does all of the customer correspondence personally.
Wow. Okay.
Himself.
That's mental.
Right. Everything. And he's obviously got boutique amps, right, as a production facility, and that's, takes kind of all that load off him. But he's still doing his rack business, building racks for the
stars.
Like the last time we chatted, he ended up telling me some stories about his interactions with Eddie.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And I'm just like, tell me more.
Yep.
And he goes, yeah, I've been up to the house 5150, been up heaps of times. I was like, really? And he's like, yeah, all the time. And he goes, even recently. And I said, what, with Wolfgang? Yeah. He goes, I just built his new rig that he's touring with
right.
Of course.
Mammoth, right? So it's just like that all the time. He's just got, and he's building a new rack for Slash one day and a, something for Wolfgang the next, and that's he's doing that all the time, as well as R&D for new product development for the Friedman brand, as well as quality control on what's coming out of boutique, as well as all the customer comms. And he's full on.
Yep.
So he's that kind of relationship with him has just kind of continued to evolve, and we keep in contact because now he's made me the kind of service and mod guy for Friedman in Australia.
How cool is that?
So that's cool. So that gives us a good reason gives me a good reason to hassle him and get on a call.
And,
and keep contact.
Are you going to catch up with him when you're in the States?
Yeah. Definitely.
Cool.
Man.
So he's actually, I've got a demo Alpha that's been doing a bit of a circuit over there. So this is the one that Kyle Bull featured on his channel. It then went to Mark Lewis, who's a kind of heavy metal kind of producer guy down in Nashville. Mm-hmm. That was kind of Kyle recommended. He said you should get the amp into Mark's hands.
I know that name. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I've seen his name mentioned before. When as soon as you said metal in Nashville, I was like, that's a guy.
Yeah, it kind of just a key guy in the industry, right? That unit arrived at Dave's shop today.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, we're gonna have a bit of a play when I'll be there probably Monday, Tuesday next week.
Wow.
So we've got a bunch of things to work on. Back to the kind of like, seeing how we might work together on a few things. We've got some stuff to go through there, and we're going to have a bit of see how you want to pull the amp apart, I'm sure, and and have a look. I've already sent him, because he's shared so much with me. I sent him the schematic. I said, "Here it is, mate."
Yep.
No, I'm not hiding any secrets from you.
Yeah.
So he's just kind of like, we'll see what happens. I'm going to be visiting Joe Barisi as well.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
Which is going to be cool.
Because you did the custom head for him as well, right?
Did the custom head for Joe. So that's probably going to be when I get, because I'm going to spend a couple of days in LA, a 2-week visit, a couple of days in LA, then Indiana with Shay, my amp buddy from Monomyth. If anyone doesn't know who Shay is and Monomyth amps, look him up. And Shay's the guy that's been building the Altas in the US
right
for us, right? So we do kind of pre-assembly here, and then ship kind of assembled basically circuit boards, and then he does drop them into the chassis, transformers, head cabs, and all that reside in the US. It means that method means that we're not having to ship stuff out here.
Yep.
Big heavy stuff.
That would make it so much cheaper for the end user as well.
And ship it all back again. I've done that a little bit, but it's you're shipping a 23 kilogram tube head in a box like this.
Yep.
From the US to Australia is $300.
Yeah, man.
$400, somewhere in that region, one way. It's expensive. Yeah. Until I get to the level where I can freight stuff, load up a pallet and put it on a boat or whatever. That's maybe at some point in the future that will happen. But we're single unit stuff at the moment. So keeping all that stuff in the US makes a lot of obviously commercial sense, right? And this is one of the reasons for the visit, other than kind of meeting these people in person and kind of cementing these relationships, if you like, is visiting some production facilities, not boutique amps but some other ones, and because Shay has he's at the kind of the same stage of development where he's got demand, but not enough production facilities to keep up with that demand. And you can kind of at this point, and him and I talk about this quite a lot, which is, do you ramp up? Do you find a way to ramp up to meet that demand, or do you just let it be there and be that, boutique, hand done, one at a time guy, and
what decision have you come to?
Well, I want to explore. I don't like not knowing.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
I don't like not knowing. It's like that's the kind of the what if thing. Oh, I should have done this, or what if I did that? So I want to investigate how that might work and how, and even if that looks like rather than a turnkey production facility that goes all the way to boxing and shipping, even if it's like they do 80% of it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Leave the last kind of tubing, biasing, quality control or whatever comes back to Shay to do or whatever. And I don't know. We just got to explore whether that can work. And my investigation so far on that, because I've spoken to some people from here, is that if you're prepared to go to maybe 25, 30 units minimum
mm-hmm.
in a single order, then you can have you're in the game in terms of getting some sort of factory production going. One-offs, no one's interested in one-offs, I can do one-offs. That's no problem, right? You're looking at, so 20, 25, 30 units, that's at the point where you're making a bit of you're backing yourself that you're about to sell them because you're going to have to pay for them.
Yeah.
Yep.
So do you
Right.
do you think if your amps are made over in America, then the Australian community would be more open to shipping one over just for the tall poppy syndrome of it?
That's an interesting question.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say yes, because like any Australian band that has success overseas, we always claim them. We don't care.
I always supported them. Yeah.
Yeah, it is that. It's like that thing you and I were talking about, or we didn't talk about. You sent to me yesterday, Troy, where it's like it is that Australian like syndrome where it's just this like we're just trying to impress people overseas rather than having a homegrown culture that can celebrate itself and develop itself. And it'll be. I mean, that to me is I imagine the other aspect of that as well. Being a local business, there's at some point surely there's incentives from the Australian government where you're importing, exporting it. Like there's that whole other world of you're not just a guy who's an enthusiast making one-off amps. Like you are an export business. There'd be that whole other side to it as well, where we have there's some local musicians here who they were able to get a very, very generous grant to go touring overseas, and they didn't apply for an arts grant. They applied for there was some kind of if you're exporting a product,
trade.
It was a trade grant, and they were like, well, we're exporting music, and they got a
good
considerably large grant. It was like an extra zero on the end than you might get for an arts grant. They were able to go
really
on
interesting, actually. Yeah. That's interesting, isn't it? And I wonder where do you need to be, to get the attention of the government for something like that.
So that there's that other element where maybe that's less of a thing in the United States, but like in Australia, there is that attempt at least to cultivate what we're doing. Because I mean, like you said, if you're finishing up your job and Headfirst is your thing, it's like I'm sure that's not something you would have anticipated as a career path.
No. It's just kind of like the timing of these things is kind of like, look, I have been, over the last year, I've been thinking about how this next stage, when that might happen, because I always knew eventually, it's just a matter of time, right? I'm going to stop this crazy corporate gig thing and do what I want to do. And, and I think like, well, when's that going to happen? And it just so happened by good luck, nothing that I did, that because there's been a material change of ownership and management in this company, it created an opportunity where I could not manufacture, but I could take a redundancy option. Yep. Or probably in the US, people might call that being laid off or something like that.
Yeah.
Because I said this to my mate Shay at Monomyth. I said to him, blah, 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 redundancy. And he went, that's clearly not an American term. I had to translate. I was like, oh, well, it's when this happens. And he went, oh, so you're getting laid off. And I went, yeah, that.
Yeah, that's me.
So it's kind of come, the timing has happened because the opportunity was there to get that exit. So I got it.
Yeah.
Knowing that you're full time now, kind of gives me more motivation to ship you some stuff to just go to town on.
Yeah, me too, actually. But I got
we've got you now, Jason. Now you can't say no.
Well, because just out of interest, I was going to ask you this after, but who would you send, like West Coast, East Coast, like who, like pack and send? Is that kind of the only option for an amp? Is there anything reasonable? Because I got an amp sent from over east through pack and send. I reckon they cooked it a little bit. I reckon it got dropped, and it was expensive. It was like $200+ one way. But is there any other options?
Yeah, I mean, sending to Perth is obviously the most expensive, but I don't.
You may as well send it to the moon.
Yeah, I don't think I've spent 200. I could look up. I've used Transdirect a lot. I got burnt by them once, but it's probably not their fault. It was probably the underlying courier.
Yeah.
So I got one of those things where I got subsequently charged extra because they claimed that the declaration of the package dimensions and weight was undercooked.
Right. Okay.
Gotcha.
Which I don't believe. I mean, I actually took photos of it. I had photos of the thing, and I used that photographic evidence to try and argue my case and fail. Right? They did not take it. They just went, nah, too bad.
Yep.
We've taken your money. You're not going to get it back. So I was pissed off about that.
Maybe Leon, like you and I, we'll load up a pallet worth of amps and just send it over to you. And
but if you use Transdirect, it's pretty cool because what that is just it's a front end for all the different carriers.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So you'll go in there and you'll get quotes from, FedEx, TNT. TNT have become FedEx now anyway.
Right.
You'll get Star Trek, you'll get Couriers Please, all the Aussie carriers, and they all quote, boom, 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 and you just choose one.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like because you shipped me something with Transdirect, I was like, next time I had to send something, I was like, I'll use that thing that Jason used. So, they're pretty cool, right? I actually got through all the shipping stuff. I've ended up with a business account with FedEx in the US, which is really handy.
Right.
Because when I do need to ship things here, and I do, right, for the Aussie-produced Altas, the transformers and the head cabs are made by Sour Mash in the US.
Okay.
Sour Mash cabs. And the transformers are Haber transformers. And so all that stuff does need to come here for Aussie-made and supplied amps. So that FedEx business account is awesome because it is actually discount rates. And so the first thing I'm going to do when I finish up with this day job is get a FedEx account here as well.
Yep.
So we'll be able to use that. If you need to ship me stuff, I'll be able to. I'll get this,
it's going to happen.
Business account.
I really want my Marshall to have a birthday because it's certainly not had one since I've owned the amp, and I think.
Is it your JMP?
Yeah. It's a great sounding amp, but it's just, you got a couple of scratchy pots in there, and just I don't know if it's sounding the way it used to sound. But it's, we mentioned it before. It was modded by this local dude at some point in the last 20 years, who's since died. So I don't know what he did to it, but he was apparently the Perth Marshall Whisperer in his day, and he did something to it. I don't know what. It sounded awesome when I bought it. So anyway, I just want it to be, working as good as it can be. And it's one of those things there's a lot of guys with a lot of knowledge here, but if it's like an amp of that era, I would prefer that the person that understands those amps the best, look at it. Because you just never know. Like I've seen some of the amps you've pulled apart and it's like, I'll look at this mod and look at how this person's fixed that. It's like everyone's got their own ideas and opinions because, maybe something works, but is it really working the best way it possibly can work? You only know that through a lot of experience on say, that circuit. So,
it's, you either kind of my philosophy on that stuff, I think, is you either restore it to as close to factory spec as you possibly can, or you mod it properly.
Yeah.
Kind of a few tinkering things. It's what's just you might as well just leave it original.
Yeah.
Is that is your JMP a good old 4-hole or is it 2-hole?
It's 4-hole. Two of the holes have been there's no socket in there at the moment. They've been removed.
It sounds like a plexi circuit that's been converted into a
master volume
2203 master volume style.
I'm pretty sure that's what it is. It has a master volume on it.
Very common.
Yeah.
That's very common mod, yeah.
But it's one of those things where this guy apparently he did things to Marshalls. He had a thing that he used to always do them. What that is, I don't know. And the amp sounds good, but I'd actually just be curious to see what it is, because at least said if you were to take a look at it, you at least can understand this and this and this. So I'll get that.
Well, there's a handful of things that can be done those. I mean, the 2203s are cool. Like stock, they're cool, but they are a bit. It's the JCM 800 thing. Yeah, it's they are a bit bass heavy in the preamp, and so they're a little bit not the tightest thing. Which is why so many players ended up putting tube screamers and so on in front of them to carve off the bottom end.
I mean,
well, you can do that in the amp.
Yeah, I love the character of it. I love the punch, and yeah, it sounds massive, but there's a point when it just gets a bit too flubby, and yeah, the tube screamer, that's all it is. Is you chuck that in there, and Bob's your auntie. It sounds like $1 million, but
has it got enough gain? You're happy with the level of gain that it has?
I would probably, for my own benefit, appreciate a little bit more gain.
Who doesn't want more gain?
That's the sickness. So yeah, but I've got.
We all have that sickness, Troy. Don't worry.
It's hard, man. I mean, this is what we spoke about this yesterday with just dialing in some digital stuff, and some of the gigs I do need a cleaner sound, and it's just a constantly trying to resist adding more distortion to something, because unfortunately you can't play Return of the Mac with a lot of distortion. Well, you can, but
or Taste of
Heaven. Yeah, that's right. But no, I've actually I was gonna say, so before we started, I said I had a massive box arrive. Now
I'm curious.
Yeah, I'll show you. Hang on.
Oh yeah, the box.
I think as well, while you're doing that, Troy, I think I've mentioned this to you before, Jace, but rather than ship you something, I might just get you to make me something. Hey, there it is.
Oh wow, Cornford, yeah. Sweet.
I have headphones on, so just give me a sec.
I was just so that's
I
was telling Jason that I should just get him to make me an amp rather than ship him some of my crap.
Yeah,
but that's cool.
Well, no, this is very. Yeah, well, that's courtesy of Scott, friend of the channel, who'll probably be watching this / listening to this. But
love you, Scott.
It's just gonna live at the studio for a little while. Thankfully, it's a really cool amp. I haven't heard it in a long time. Actually, that's not true, because I plugged it in just before we started, and just to make sure it works, and because I was curious. But yeah,
what model is that, Troy?
It's the MK52.
I remember, Jason. Did you ever buy Guitar
MK50H? It's called.
Yep. Did either of you ever buy Guitar Techniques magazine?
No.
So it was like just a bunch of, I thought, anonymous British guitar players who were really good. Like Guthrie Govan used to write a column for them.
Yeah.
David Kilminster used to write a column.
Right.
Charlie Griffiths, who's in Hacken.
Okay.
Like just all these people have gone on to be, very, very prominent, successful guitar players. Like monsters, And for a while, it was like everything they'd be like, oh, the gear that we use is a Cornford MK50H into whatever with this mic on it. You get a CD on it.
Yeah.
It was Phil Hilborn.
That's you guys know the designer behind Cornford? You know the story?
Did he die?
Victory's related to Cornford somehow,
yes.
right?
Yeah. So guy called Martin Kidd.
Yes, that's right.
2 Ds.
Apparently, he convinced Guthrie to put out Erotic Cakes and funded it. Yeah,
really?
The Guthrie Govan, like him getting out there and becoming the demigod that he now is. Was I remember reading that because it was like,
wow, that I didn't know.
Columnist Guthrie Govan has a new album out, and they had one of the songs. They had "Slippery Wet Thing" transcribed in there, and people like flipped out about it. They were like, "Man, we knew Guthrie was good, but like,
yeah."
And then he blew up. And I remember Troy saying, "Oh, I've got Guthrie Govan's solo album." I was like, "Isn't that guy that does Guitar Techniques magazine?" So,
yep, freshly downloaded illegally off the Pirate Bay. It was 2006. It was a different time, but I remember recording that amp a long time ago. I'm curious to see what I can dial in now with a bit more knowledge and experience, because I remember it feeling like really dry, and I kind of had to work a little harder with it.
Is that amp been in Perth for a long time? Because I've had one of those in here to look at.
Yes, it was a long time ago. It moved to Sydney probably about 10 years ago with the guy, with Scott. And then he's just sent it over, literally.
Oh, okay. Now, so he's held it the whole time. So the amp that I had was been doing the rounds amongst different players in Melbourne.
I was going to say, tell us the secrets of the MK50H, James.
Well, my memory of it, it's very Marshall esque,
Marshall
inspired, but it's a slightly different, kind of variation. Martin Kidd did an amp when he was at Cornford. He did an amp for Richie Kotzen.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
there's an RK100.
Yeah.
So it's no surprise that they now at Victory they have a Richie Kotzen head.
Of course,
because Martin,
didn't they make a really small recording amp called the Harlequin or something like that?
Hellcat. There was maybe it was the Harlequin. Yeah, there was like a 5-watt thing too.
5 watts, yeah, and it had heaps of gain. And I remember people being like, "Oh, it's a really good studio amp because it's you get a cranked up sound and it's not super loud."
Is that at Victory or at?
No, I think it's at Cornford. Cornford.
That was Cornford, yeah.
I would go out on a limb and say any amp marketed as a good studio amp because it's very low wattage is they're fine, they're great, but it's like a 20-watt. Well, you've done them, like the modding the 20-watt Marshall things. It's like that's a wicked gigging amp as much as anything.
Yeah,
20 watts was pretty loud.
Oh yeah,
man,
it is. Right?
I've filled a big room here with a 30-watt Synergy head thing. It's like, that's plenty.
Cornford Harlequin, that's what it's called.
Yeah, they were cool.
Very cool.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so anyway, I'll have a bit of a blast on that, probably today when if I get a little bit of time to noodle around. I haven't had much. The only guitar playing I've done in the last couple of days is trying to learn a few riffs from some AC/DC songs for one gig. So it'd be nice to do a bit more shred and maybe play some stuff in drop D.
On that note, should we bring this epic journey through Tone to a close for today? I feel like we have to get you on again.
Man, there's so much that I wanted to ask, and I haven't had it's been over 2 hours now, so I appreciate the time, man. Really, 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 really appreciate it.
This is the best fun ever.
Yeah.
I'd love to come back on, and obviously, in a month from now, or 5 weeks from now, I'm going to have a lot more time too. So
yeah, we'll get you back on, man. It's it'll be an absolute pleasure to talk again. And I've got for future. This is what's coming. Speakers. I want to talk about speakers. I want to talk about tone stacks. I've got one question, which I'm not going to get you to answer now, but my Marshall, right? It has the guy bought it off was like, yeah, it's a good one. Right? You know when people say, oh, that's a good one?
It's a good one.
So for the next time you're on, I'd like you to help qualify or quantify what a good one means.
A good one.
So
interesting.
That's some questions for next time, if that's all right.
Yeah,
that's
cool.
Great.
Yeah. I'll dwell on that one.
Yeah.
Complex. That's a complex question.
Yeah.
You can ask Dave while you're there, and I'm sure he'll have plenty of input for it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
I mean, the answer might be it's the one I own, so that's why it's the good one.
Exactly. Any parting words before you depart, Jason? And where can people find you on the internet?
Oh, yeah. So I have a website, so headfirstamplification.com. Check out my YouTube channel. There's Headfirst Amplification. You search that, you'll find it. I'm on Facebook. And I'm on Instagram. It's always Headfirst Amplification. Just have a hunt around, and you can, send me a Facebook message. You can email me. Any of that stuff.
Awesome,
brilliant.
Well, mate, the Saints are playing the Giants this week, so good luck with that one. I don't mean that because I don't care for the Saints at all, but good luck. I'm going
to ask. I didn't get to ask you your question. So, Troy, I'm going to guess you're Freo, and Leon, are you West Coast Eagles?
Definitely West Coast here, but Troy's a complicated issue.
Well, yeah, you're right. Like this from the last few seasons, yeah, Fremantle. But I grew up an Eagles supporter, but now Fremantle pay me money, so that's a really obnoxious way of answering. That's not really the truth. I became a Fremantle fan because I now go to all the games. I have for the last 5 years, and yeah.
So we both have our history with Ross Lyon.
That's what I was going to say, man. It's we took him off here. You got him back. That North Melbourne game the other day was the most dour game of football of all time. So congratulations on that one. You can have him.
No,
Yeah, but no, you guys, you might be in for a good season. Like they've been playing pretty well.
It's better. It's better than the last few already. So,
oh man, I tell you what, I remember when I started really watching footy again a couple of years ago, watching a Fremantle Saints game, and it was just it was the most excruciating thing I've ever sat through. It was just so boring. It was like lots of skill errors. No game plan, so it's changed now. I'm like a bit more excited for the next time they play. You beat us round 1 this year, but that's okay. You know, we'll get you next time.
Yeah, I'm sure you will.
Happy days, mate. Well, it's great to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on, and we'll hopefully talk to you again very soon.
Yeah,
everybody. Peace.
Peace. Thank you.